In this short video, I will explain how we derive the harvesting function in the Easter Island model. As a quick reminder, time is continuous and there are two stocks in the model, the population and the resources. We assume that everybody is working, but they may not be all working in the harvesting sector. The resource S is any renewable resource that is useful for our islanders to produce food, which may include forest, soil, fish, birds. The harvesting function is ht equals alpha beta LTST. So alpha and beta are constants. Like before, alpha represents the effectiveness of harvesting effort to produce food. In the fishing industry model, fishing effort was simply the number of boats, capital B, in the ocean. Now it is simply replaced by beta L. So L is the number of workers and beta is the fraction of them working as farmers. The harvesting function could be used directly as is. It would simply be assuming that for any unseen reason, a constant fraction of islanders beta work in the harvesting sector, and we choose not to say anything about their motivation. All the model dynamics would be the same and the conclusions would hold. However, we may want to model why they choose to work in one sector and not the other. Or we may want to see what happens when a fraction of farmers are working in the agricultural sector is not constant. For that, we would need to introduce real preferences and farming technology to study this choice more formally. To introduce choice, we will assume that islanders can not only produce harvests, capital H, but also produce some other good, labeled capital M. This other good may include any other activity, such as producing tools, building houses, creating art, such as moai, and other household production. Islanders can decide to work in any of the two sectors. Capital L sub H islanders work in the harvesting sector, and capital L sub M work in the other sector. The technology in the harvest sector is the same as before. We have simply replaced beta L by L sub H. So the total harvest produced is capital H equals alpha S L sub H. For the other sector, the technology is even simpler. Each unit of labor L sub M in the other sector produces 1 unit of output M. Finally, the budget constraint in terms of production possibilities is simply that the labor used in the harvest sector L sub H plus the labor used in the other sector L sub M has to equal the total labor available in the economy, capital L. We can use different approaches to model the optimal production choice of the islander. A simple approach that was not used in the paper but that is perfectly valid is to assume that we have a representative islander. His or her utility is in terms of the entire productive output of the island. It is a Cobb-Douglas utility function. U of H and M equals capital H to the beta times capital M to the 1 minus beta. To make our lives easier, we may use our previously defined labor endowment and substitute what this labor allows this representative islander to produce. So we may substitute L sub H by H divided by alpha S, and we may replace L sub M by M. This resulting budget constraint can be thought of as expressing opportunity costs. For instance, the opportunity cost of the representative islander to have 1 extra unit of harvest H is to lose 1 over alpha S unit of other good M. We can write the representative islander's maximization as a 2-variable constraint maximization, or we can make our lives even easier by substituting directly in the utility function M by L minus 1 H over alpha S to the 1 minus beta. This way, it is a 1-variable maximization without constraint. The single choice variable is H. The first order condition is beta H to the beta minus 1 multiplied by the parenthesis, plus the second term is H to the beta multiplied by the derivative of the parenthesis with respect to H. So it's 1 minus beta times the parenthesis to the minus beta multiplied by the derivative of the inside of the parenthesis with respect to h, which is simply minus 1 over alpha s. This whole first derivative of the utility function with respect to h is set to 0. We could easily check the sufficient conditions by taking the second derivative. I'm not going to go through all the algebra, but simply know that once simplified, we get the same harvesting quantity as before, h equals alpha beta ls. The interpretation is obvious. Since beta is the importance of food in the utility of the representative islander, the higher it is, the more labor he or she is willing to dedicate to harvesting. This representative islander approach is perfectly valid. We do not necessarily need to introduce markets formally. We could simply invoke the first fundamental theorem of welfare economics that states that absent transaction costs, price manipulations, and assuming no excess demand or excess supply, the markets for foods and other goods will tend toward a competitive equilibrium that is Pareto optimal and will generate the exact same solution as the representative islander approach. That is, in effect, sort of a social planner. Note, however, that we are not stating that it is perfectly efficient, since the stock of resources is always assumed fixed, while we know it is not. In practice, we know that open access will lead to overexploitation of resources. But if you want to get your nice idea published in a journal like American Economic Review, then I guess using this simple model is not enough, and it will be better to develop the whole general equilibrium model of the island economy. Personally, I see one clear advantage of doing this, which is the ability to introduce taxes directly, which would allow governments to improve the outcome of the population by reducing over-harvesting by essentially taxing food. So we will now introduce prices. Since we don't care about good M, let's set its price to 1. It is thus the numerator, and we compare all other goods to it. So the price of harvest can simply be P. It is the price of 1 unit of food relative to the price of 1 unit of other goods. We now must differentiate between supply and demand. The supply is the output produced by the islanders on the labor market, and the demand is what they will buy on the goods market. The technologies are the same as before. We simply now write HS for supply of harvest and MS for the supply of other goods. We must introduce two other prices, so the wage that islanders can earn by working. These wages are set according to standard firm microeconomics. At the optimum, the price of a factor of production must equal its real marginal productivity. What is the productivity of a farmer? Well, it can be obtained by dividing the total harvest output of the island, H, by the total number of islanders who work in the food sector. So that gives us the amount of food produced by one islander, and we multiply this by P, which is the price, and get then the real marginal product of farmers. The wage in the other sector is set even more simply. W sub M equals the islander production of other good MS divided by the people producing them, L sub M, multiplied by the price 1. Using the production function MS equal L sub M, we get that the wage in the other sector is 1. We now define the consumer problem, this time for a single islander. Individuals live for 1 unit of time and supply 1 unit of labor. Their preferences for food and other goods are like before, except that we now explicitly state that they are demanded quantities. So the utility of one islander is hd to the beta multiplied by md to the 1 minus beta. Now, an important fact to introduce is the arbitrage on the labor market. Workers can now work in whatever sector they like, and they don't have any special preference to working as farmer or as statue builder. All they care about is how much they can earn in each career. So, for instance, if W sub H was higher than W sub M, then every new worker would choose to become a farmer. So what would happen? From the wage setting equation, we see that LH would go up. Initially, from the harvest technology, we see that the supply of harvest would go up in the same proportion as the increase in LH, and thus the wage wouldn't change. However, from the dynamics of the resource stock, we know that this extra harvesting as time goes on would reduce S and thus decrease harvests. This would in the end bring back W sub H down until it is at parity with the other sector. Since all workers are equally productive and can freely choose in what sectors they want to work, we get this arbitrage on the labor market. We must finally define the budget constraint for an islander. Since he or she works for a single period and supplies 1 unit of labor, and since the wage is the same for any sector, then the income available for a worker would simply be W. The expense would be what the islander needs to buy, P times HD plus MD times 1. Unlike before, we may not directly replace HD by its value in terms of alpha S, since now there's no guarantee that this particular worker is the one who is the farmer. The islander is buying the food and other goods on the goods market. We may, however, still use the budget constraint to substitute MD by W minus PHD in the utility function and get a maximization problem with a single choice variable HD and no constraint. The first order condition looks similar as before, and after simplification, we get HD equals beta W divided by P. So this is the demand for harvest from a single islander. To get the demand from all islanders, we use the fact that they are all essentially the same. Harvest H is equal to small h multiplied by the population L. The total harvest demand is thus equal to beta multiplied by the total wage income, WL, divided by the price of food, P. We may qualify this model as a general equilibrium model, since all markets are modeled explicitly and must balance with each other. The formal definition of the equilibrium is a set of quantities and prices such that all agents behave optimally given prices and all markets clear. In practice, it implies this set of conditions that we have already used for the most part. Equilibrium on the labor market, optimal sector choice, i.e. arbitrage on the labor market. The last condition we need to use, equilibrium on the food market, so the supply of harvest HS has to equal the demand for harvest HD. And the optimal production choice, implying that the wage is equal to the real marginal productivity of workers. So we use the equilibrium on the food market to set HS equals HD equal H. Then, using the production choice in the food sector, we may simply divide on each side by P, and we get W over P equals alpha S. Substituting this in the harvest demand function, we recover our prior harvest function, H equals alpha beta LS.